Hello and welcome to The Written Word, a product of Harvard Medicine Magazine. I'm Stephanie Duchin from the Office of Communications at Harvard Medical School. We are here today with HMS alum Edward, or Ted, Brodkin, a psychiatrist and researcher at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine. In 2021, Ted and postdoctoral fellow Ashley Pallathra co-authored the book Missing Each Other: How to Cultivate Meaningful Connections. Missing Each Other addresses the increasing sense of loneliness and alienation people have experienced in the US in recent decades. It delves into the science behind establishing strong interpersonal connections, and it describes specific behaviors that can help people overcome obstacles like distraction, stress, and political divisiveness to really listen to one another. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, it started with my work as a physician and a psychiatrist. I'm focused on the autism spectrum in adults. And as part of that work, Ashley, my co author, and I were working on developing a program to support adults on the spectrum with social functioning. But as we were working on that program, the more we thought about it, we started to think about this concept of interpersonal attunement. And the more that we thought, this concept is really applicable to almost everyone, not just people on the autism spectrum. And we became aware of the growing literature documenting rising rates of loneliness, feelings of alienation in our society, as you mentioned. And there's debate about why that is, but there's growing rise of technology. A lot of our communication is done electronically. And that was even before the pandemic. Then the pandemic came along, further separating us. So we just thought that this was a really important topic to address for the general public. And then I would say, even at a larger macro level, we started to think about the big world problems that we face, whether that's the pandemic, climate change, nuclear weaponry, all those sorts of things, and to really try to address these major problems. It's so crucial to be able to communicate effectively with each other. And so for all of those reasons, we were really interested in this topic.
Now, you mentioned attunement, and the book is focused on this concept and what it's comprised of. What is attunement, and what makes it important scientifically or biologically?
Yeah, simply put, the way we define attunement is the ability to tune in to your own state of mind and body while also connecting with another person and maintaining that connection over the twists and turns of an interaction. So that interaction could be a conversation. It could be playing music with someone. It could be dancing with someone. It could be playing sports with someone. But we argue in the book that this skill of interpersonal attunement is really the fundamental essence of human connection.
And what makes up attunement? You talk about components of it, sort of breaking it down into things that people can do.
That's right. So, yeah, when you think about this in your own life, um, or those people you admire, let's say athletes you see or dancers, you might think this is such an intricate, complicated skill. How could you ever even understand this or get better at it? So that's what we tried to do. We tried to approach it, much the way, as an analogy, you would approach basketball. If you see a fantastic basketball player, and you might think to yourself, like, how do they do that? And how do they stay in such close communication with their teammates? But really, the way they did that was they started with fundamental skills: dribbling, passing, shooting. And then they were able to put those skills together in a fluid sequence through a lot of practice. And so when it comes to interpersonal attunement in general, that's what we've tried to do here. We broke it down into what we call relaxed awareness, listening, understanding, and mutual responsiveness. And we have a chapter on each of those components, some of the science behind each of those, neuroscience and physiology. And then at the end of each chapter, we propose some exercises that people could try on their own. to see if this helps to enhance some of these skills.
What are the benefits that those practicing those components brings to people? Or to ask that question another way, what are the consequences if you don't?
Yeah, I mean, interpersonal attunement is one of those things that theoretically should come naturally. I mean, one of the classic ways that scientists and psychologists have studied interpersonal attunement is by studying parents, classically mothers and babies, and the interaction that happens between mothers and babies in the first days and weeks and months of life. And generally, no one's instructing them on how to do this. This is a natural process. Um, but what we argue in the book is that as we grow up, there are many things that happen to us. There are many stresses in our society. There are many pulls on our attention, for example, through electronic media and so on and so forth. And it's possible for these skills of interpersonal attunement to atrophy or to not be used as much, for us to not get as much practice in them. So I think the benefits of doing some of these exercises is to get back to those fundamental skills and um, build them up again, much the way you would go to a gym and lift weights and try to build up those muscles and those capacities again.
Has what you've learned affected the way that you practice?
I think it really has. I mean, one of the things I really like about this book and these principles that we lay out here is that they're things that I actually use myself, both in my practice with patients and honestly in my daily life, in my personal life. Um, and I find them beneficial for myself. And that makes me feel better about suggesting it for other people. Like I'm willing to take my own medicine, so to speak. In fact, I'm eager to.
How can the book inform healthcare delivery?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to the fundamental doctor-patient relationship or healthcare professional patient relationship that we learn about in medical school. One of the stories that we told in the book that I really liked so much, if I do say so myself, was a story about a medical student. I think her name was Megan. And Megan had originally been trained as a musician. Like she had gone to a conservatory and she learned, I think she was a violist and she played chamber music. And then she went to medical school and she was learning doctor patient interviewing during, as a, let's say, a third year medical student. And in this little article, which she wrote in the Juilliard Journal, because I think she had gone to Juilliard, she compared this process of interviewing a patient to playing chamber music in the sense that you can go in with a plan, right? Like as a medical student, you can go in thinking, I'm going to interview the patient and I'm going to cover this, that, and the other point. But then when you're actually there sitting with the patient and the patient brings up something else, you really need to have the capacity to be responsive, to listen and be responsive to the patient and what's on the patient's mind and have some flexibility. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about interpersonal attunement. And I thought her article just beautifully made this comparison to the way chamber music musicians needed to be tuned into each other and flexible and responsive, and in much the same way that when we have a conversation with someone, we need to do those things. I mean, I would hasten to add that there are more and more pressures on healthcare professionals that make it harder to do that, to really maintain that strong doctor-patient relationship. But to the extent that we can, I think it's very valuable.
And then one last question for you. What lasting lesson have you learned from the process of collecting all of this research and putting it into practice?
I think the importance of prioritizing connection and improving the quality of our connections and continuing to work on that in myself and try to help others, whether it's my patients on the autism spectrum or anyone who wants to read our book or hear about these kinds of ideas. I think the quote at the very beginning of the book is um, only connect. And I think that's a sort of a good mantra as we go through our lives.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to connect today and that when our video goes up, our Viewers will also be able to connect with you and the work that you're doing. So thank you very much. We've been talking with Ted Brodkin about his book, Missing Each Other. Ted, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Learn more at our website at hms.harvard.edu/magazine.